Heads.
Or tails.
Heads. Told you. I never find that as satisfying as I'd imagined.
Chin up. There's always next time.
I suppose there is.
Hello and welcome to a second part 2 of Spoiled Games. It's all about BioShock Infinite. We're going to focus now on a little bit more of the story, some of the technical aspects, and the gameplay. But once again, the show is called Spoiled Games. We're not going to tell you anything. We will be spoiling everything about this game. BioShock Infinite, and at least our estimation, is one of the finest things you can play. Go finish it, and then come back and watch the show. You'll get a lot more out of it. But with that being said, I'd like to introduce yet again our panel. Kevin Van Ord, senior editor at GameSpot.com. Hey. Thanks for staying around.
Absolutely.
And editor-in-chief of Giant Bomb at GiantBomb.com, Jeff Gerstman.
Howdy.
All right, so one thing we didn't get to in the last episode, we all realized it once the cameras were off, was the Luteces, these twins that intrude upon the story in a very darkly comical way.
Yeah, well, I think it starts out a little more straight comical and then darkens as you figure out more and more about what that world really is. They were my favorite characters in the whole game. You know, just the popping up at the random moments, you know, kind of to help you, but later on you're like, are these people really pointing me in the right direction?
And they're so bemused by the entire thing. Everything else, everyone else is either freaking out that there's a man running around killing people, or...
And they're just excited to watch the results of their twisted experiment, you know? It's like, as ostensibly the people that put a lot of this in motion, that they're able to just kind of sit back and just go like, that's about how we figured it'd turn out.
Surprising.
Surprising that it worked?
Surprising that it didn't kill him.
But a magnetic repulsive field around one's body can come in handy.
If it doesn't kill you.
A fair point.
Now, did you put together that they're also the ones who are rowing you into the lighthouse at the very beginning of the game? I mean, I should have, because it's the only English accents that you hear in Infinite.
Yeah, that was, for me, that was pretty clear early on, but especially because they always hit the same tone, more or less, for a while in the game, which is like, that was very comical, the thing about the rowing, you know, and stuff like that. And, you know, when you disembark and he's like, is anybody going to be meeting me here?
I'd certainly hope so.
It does seem like a dreadful place to be stranded.
So, you know, so they hit that comic spot for a while to tie all that stuff together.
Once you get to the end of the game and you realize what a role that they played in the child who was given away to wipe away the dead. I mean, that's really the guilt that Booker is trying to absolve himself of. Yeah. I don't know how I feel about them in the end.
Yeah, I mean, they set a lot of this stuff in motion. You know, if you're finding all the Vox phones and going through a lot of that stuff, like, you know, the Luteces, or, you know, the Luteces of this world put together, making that city fly, created the contraption that created tears. Like, a lot of things flowed out of the female Lutece, and then, you know,
and
when they come together, finding
sibling.
all the voxophones about the sibling and all that stuff. Like, it's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
But there's an element of forgiveness there, because because they get to the stage where you know, where it's clear that they have a lot to atone for themselves, and, you know, there's that line where they say that Booker is their hair shirt, just like the brand on his hand is his hair shirt. So obviously they're trying to atone for the mistakes as much as Booker is trying to atone for his.
Which really ties in with the central theme that all these people are somehow, in one good or bad way, trying to make up for something really bad they did in their life.
So if you're traipsing around the multiverse like that, you're eventually going to screw something up.
Yeah.
And create some sort of horrific, endless loop.
But then there's that sort of central tragedy, which is the character of Elizabeth, or Anna, this, you know, the daughter of the Booker DeWitt that we see in the flashbacks. That, I think, is probably one of the greatest technical achievements I've ever seen in a game. That her animations, their decision to go with the stylized look, I think all works in the favor to just evoke an emotional response that if anyone was worried if it was an escort mission, I probably would have escorted her through the game because I cared about her.
Yeah, they did a fantastic job with that, you know, and some of that they showed pre-release, you know, her getting taken away by Songbird and reaching out, and, you know, her being frightened, kind of hiding from Songbird and stuff like that. Like, that's the thing that makes that whole game work. I think if they didn't nail the animations on Elizabeth, I think the game would be a much harder sell.
Yeah, no, I would have to agree. I mean, if you just, I think it was, granted, I had been so impressed throughout the game, but when you sit down, you grab the guitar, and she starts singing.
Yeah.
And that's when I was like, this is exactly what a Disney animation would be like. Both, I think, in the classic sense, you know, when Walt was still alive, but then even something like Beauty and the Beast is these beautiful, fluid animations.
Yeah.
But that's part of the selling of the world, pretty much. I mean, we have to believe that this is a utopia. And what's more utopian than, you know, a girl with wide eyes
Trapped in a castle.
Exactly. And that's how the game has to begin to sell that these people would believe this is utopia.
And then I remember the first few times she gets mad at you. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Be my friend.
Can I just reload this and not kill those people? Is
Yeah.
that gonna, like, no, probably not. Like, can I make sure she's looking the other way? Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I think all of us have discovered, you know, small technical quirks, which
Yes.
easily solved by a reload. And thank God it was a game that was more than happy to play sections over again.
For me, it ended up being that, you know, the enemies don't really mess with her at all, and you know they kind of explain up front. You know, you don't have to protect her. Don't worry about it, which is smart because otherwise,
I think it's very
otherwise
smart
it's an
decision.
escort mission, and that's not a fun game anymore. But seeing her cowering in a corner, and then AI guys trying to get to me, running up, getting stuck on her for a couple of seconds,
Yeah.
then just running around her to come get to me.
I think there, and I think where they try to make their solution is you'll be so focused on how many enemies are throwing at you that you're only going to notice Elizabeth when she's like, hey,
Right.
here's a gun. Which, as frequently as that happened, I was like, oh, I love that sound and the sound design when those things would happen.
Yeah. When she's throwing coins, especially, like that
Yeah.
would be my favorite little. Pretty good.
I wish I had someone who could find that much money on my behalf.
It gets to be a lot too. All of a sudden, she's like
Yeah.
throwing you like $200. You're like, this is great.
And it's always when you need it, you're standing right there by a
Right.
vending machine. She's
Yeah.
like, oh, here you go, just in case.
Yeah, I couldn't tell. I felt that sometimes when they knew that you just needed a slight tipping point to get one more thing to upgrade your vigors or get something better for one of your weapons.
Yeah, it definitely seemed like they were kind of biasing it in favor of like just kind of giving you a hand.
Which I think, and some people have complained that the normal setting, you know, it's very hard to die, which I would have to agree with. But in order to really get the most out of that story, you don't want to have those kind of sticking points. I mean, I would like to think that that was actually a very well thought out decision. That it is more about the experience of playing it and not the, kind of the more gaminess of it. Creating
And the death penalty is really minimal.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're losing a little bit of money. You know, some of those guys are getting their health back, but you're right back in the fight. Like it's even less of a death penalty than the chambers in BioShock. One were.
There are times in BioShock where I would get in this kind of ugly loop where I was always coming out just weakened enough for the circumstance at hand.
Right. Yeah. I feel like I just kind of would, in some cases, could just throw myself onto a Big Daddy over and over again. It's like, well, I'll just respawn, run up, keep hitting him, keep hitting him, keep hitting him. You know, eventually this is going to work.
In terms of the more traditional aspects of the game that is BioShock Infinite, I mean, I felt that the combat was in all more satisfying. That might just be because of the environments that we were fighting in.
I think BioShock Infinite is more traditionally fun, right, than
Yeah.
the original BioShock.
Yeah.
It's more about moving around in the spaces and more about getting the drop on your enemy, and you know you can get on the rails and grind around and do all that kind of stuff. So I think just by very nature, that kind of thing is more fun than what you did in
And the
BioShock.
vigors seem better attuned to really kind of assist in the combat, you know. Bucking Bronco was just kind of an endlessly satisfying thing to do, especially when you had the shotgun in your hand.
The weird thing that ended up happening is I ended up playing Infinite very similarly to how I played the original BioShock, because I went electricity most of the time. But instead of a wrench, you know, I ended up shooting them. But I spec'd way in favor of the wrench in original BioShock and just shock club. And you can do that, I mean, with the melee attack in this, but the weapons I felt were a lot more satisfying, and it was a lot easier to kind of get shots off with the guns. But I did still find myself just, all right, I'm going to shock you, and it's going to chain to these people, so everyone just stands still. Then I'm going to shoot you all in the face.
And then I felt like I was playing Mass Effect by the time I got to the end, because between bucking Bronco and then the charging one that you get towards the end, I was doing that over and over and over again. So suddenly it's like, oh, I'm playing Mass Effect now. It's
Here you go!
Great!
The smartest thing they did with the vigors as opposed to the plasmids is having that notion with almost all of them where, all right, if I hold this button down, then it's a trap. Instead of like, okay, I'm gonna go traps and go trap heavy and do all this sort of stuff, like, you know, that aspect of it. it just made it easier to experiment
Yeah.
with the abilities. You know, it was a lot less of a hassle to just
And they were a
go
lot more
and try them
generous
all
with
out.
what the upgrades on the vigors actually granted you. That, you know, once the murder of crows turns the dead bodies into traps of other crows.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, cool. Yeah, I like. There are times I'm like, I'm just gonna do that because I just feel awesome when I do it.
Yeah.
But you were definitely more powerful in BioShock Infinite, and I felt that allowed for the game to throw a lot more enemies at you. That at least visually, the combat felt more dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just between, you know, the being able to kind of rack up headshots with the carbine and some of the other rifles and weapons and stuff like that. And then the executions. But actually, my whole first time through the game, like they instruct you, you know, kind of in that first combat scenario, like, hey, hold down X or hold down Y to execute. I did that wrong. So I played through the whole game not knowing that was in there. And then when I played it the second time, I was like, well, wait a minute, what do I? And then it's just like this whole gruesome animation of just ripping these people apart. I'm like, that's really, I'm just going to do that for the rest of the game because those guys just eat it up.
And the prompt is so small on that. We've gotten so used to enormous prompts in games.
It ain't God of War, I can tell you that. So the skyhooks, that was the part that I think all of us were the most skeptical about prior to the game's launch, and I just got kind of giddy sometimes. I mean, I would have to say I reloaded after some of the skyhook combat sequences. I'm like, I could do that better, and I want to do it for my own satisfaction.
I wish there had actually been more of that. I kind of felt like it wasn't even explored as far as maybe it should have been, and it wasn't until the last level, the very final battle, where I felt like this even is necessary at all for me to have a handle on to do it. So a lot of that time was spent like, I'm doing this because it's fun, but not because the game's particularly encouraging me to make the most out of it.
Yeah, I definitely didn't spend, you know, I mean, obviously you have to get from place to place in some instances, and the skyhooks are vital for that, and it looks great, but in just kind of the random combat where it's like, here's this, you know, skyhook on a loop, and you can just kind of go around, like, I felt that the existing loadout was so effective that I didn't need that stuff.
And see, it's funny, I felt myself probably the most challenged in the battle where Daisy is about to kill Fink. And you know, it's smaller, so more cramped, but you're moving very fast, and they throw that handyman.
Right.
And he is really, really charging after you.
Yeah, the handyman, pretty scary.
Yeah.
Of all the enemies in that game, I mean, that's probably when
because you
hear
just
that
got,
coming at
I'm
you, you're
like, I don't know,
no,
I have
like,
to
I gotta
get him in the heart.
And I wanted to see more of that because, first of all, he's really fast and agile for being huge. And then there's the moment where the
sad.
Yeah. And then there's like when the rail will be electrified.
Yeah.
And I was like, I wish there had actually been more of that kind of stuff that keeps me on my toes and keeps me on the move. Because ultimately the game is pretty easy.
I mean, that's on medium. It's on the default setting. I mean,
exactly.
they have two harder difficulty
I'm
settings
very
for a
interested to
reason.
actually try this on the harder settings.
Yeah.
In terms of not so much the challenge that it presented, but in terms of just kind of the awe, when you are on the side of the rebels, for that brief, wonderful moment where everything seems to be in concert with itself, and you're all charging at Fink's warehouse, and you have to bring down the airship. I mean, that's when I thought it hit its Indiana Jones kind of majesty, where it's like, I'm now flying onto this airship. I'm gonna, and then
it's shooting at me, and I'm
and just jumping off it. I'm like, I don't know how to get off this. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm gonna jump off. It was almost like, you know, that moment in Uncharted 2 where I realized I can jump from a Jeep to a Jeep. It's like that thing I've always wanted to do in a game, but game design itself, or the limitations of the technology, have always, you know, kept me from doing that.
Right.
And it was just such a thrill.
And they do such a good job of you know, just letting you feel free to experiment with the skylines and stuff, because I mean, the penalty for falling off is you just get respawned, like Legend of Zelda style. It's like, you didn't make that jump, here you are. I thought that was really smart, because then it's like, okay, well, all bets are off. I'm just going to fly around and do whatever and see what works. So when it comes to the moment of like getting off that airship, though that was in a trailer, so you kind of know that that's what you're supposed to do. But
I didn't see that trailer. I'm so glad I missed it.
Yeah, I know. Like it's definitely. I at some point stopped watching all the stuff about that game, but I think the last time I saw it was that trailer. So it's like, oh, this is the part where I have to jump off, and there'll be something down there. It'll work out.
It is definitely the definition of a leap of faith.
Totally.
In terms of other aspects of the gameplay, I was curious. The collectibles, I guess, within the game, primarily the Vox Populi hidden messages. How many did you guys find?
Very few.
Okay, me too.
Yeah.
And now, because now I'm replaying for the third time I'm on hard, and my whole idea is that I want to see and do everything, every voxophone, every single telescope to look through. I want to see all of this and go back and even open up all the chests when you find a key to go back and open that chest.
I
So
never
I'm
put
hoping
a
to
cipher
do that.
together with I never found any of the treasures, any of the
really?
two-part
Yeah,
things.
I mean-
I would find one piece and then go like, whatever. I never felt like I was desperately in search of resources in that game on medium, and I had gotten enough of the different pieces of gear that I felt accompanied my play style that I was like, I'll probably be okay.
Yeah, it's always depressing too when I've gone back and what's in there. I end up I'm just going to take this, but I'm not actually using this piece of armor because I like what I have better.
Right.
I liked it when it was a voxophone. That whole idea that
Yeah.
there might be one more piece of
that's
information that might
great.
flesh out
I
this
think
world for me.
there's 80 of them, right?
Yep,
80 voxophones. I think
Yeah.
I ended up in the mid 50s on that, and that's the part that's actually killing me now because when we talk about like, oh, why does Elizabeth have her powers? Like, is that explained somewhere?
answers
Like,
are
is it out there? Is it because her pinky is in some other
isn't
dimension? Because that's the
That's
theory that's going around.
replayability at its finest. It's
Yeah.
not I need to get more achievements. It's some like arbitrary grind. It's no. There's something pleasurable in playing the game, and there's this reward of having a better understanding of what I did.
How much time we have talked trash about audio logs, and I think there are so many games out there that just use them so poorly, or don't build a world that's interesting enough for you to care about whatever they're recording onto these things. I think it's a testament to the world that they've built and the story they're telling that you desperately want to find every single one of those things.
The final battle. I know some people have found that might be one of the weakest parts of the game. I was definitely challenged by it. I think I had a couple of times I didn't realize how I was trying to line up with all of the airships and just kind of tell the songbird to attack
Well, that
it.
button prompt is just sort of broken. If you're aimed in the wrong direction, or if the ship passes in front of the skyline or something, like the
Right.
button prompt can just go away. Like the amount of time you have to press it doesn't necessarily match up with the amount of time that you actually
I
get.
failed it the first time. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
once again, from a drama perspective, I mean, it really gives the illusion that this is just an endless kind of flood of enemies that's on Comstock.
And it's like that kind of satisfying over-the-top moment of just like, and I'm ripping through these zeppelins and calling in this crazy robot Birdman to do my bidding. And
it really solves, I think, the problem of the boss battle. That it's like you just want to feel that you're at your most powerful, and I think it really resolves that issue without having to do it in a, hey, we're going to take away your powers so we can have a dramatic moment.
Right.
Plus you get the visual satisfaction of Songbird coming in and all these zeppelins all around you. Plus you're on the skyline zipping around all over the place. So.
Well, guys, we've talked a lot about the game that's BioShock Infinite. I think that the one thing I can't figure out is, where do you go to from here? I mean, there's both in the narrative and in many aspects of the gameplay, it feels so all-inclusive. And I love the idea that, okay, yes, there's me another man, there's me another lighthouse. But I mean, this is really one of the most kind of profound statements of game design and game narrative I've ever seen.
I think that where they go from here is a really crazy question, because if you think about it, they've been selling a season pass for
I
this
know.
game. They've got DLC lined up, and there's no multiplayer in that game, at least not the shipping version.
Which at least makes me happy, because there's nothing that would make me more sad after playing a game like this. Like, here's a map.
Right.
No,
that's not at all. So you'd have to wonder, do they go down the Minerva's Den path of just like, here are some alternate stories set in Colombia, which I think could be really fascinating because it would help kind of flesh out that world and tell some miniature stories along the way. But I'm not necessarily looking for like, here's the real ending or here's more with Booker. Like that story seems very self-contained.
Yeah, I don't want them to continually resolve or further explicate what happened at the end of this game.
I mean, I'm with Jeff on that. I mean, I think Minerva's Den is the perfect example of the way to go with this. There's side stories, and there's still gaps that I feel like I wish I knew more about, like what
Annabelle.
happens. Yeah, not only that, there's like Comstock, and once Booker becomes Comstock, then how does Comstock become Comstock? Like, what are the things that happen in between there? Like, there's enough there where I think you can flesh things out without, I don't know, diluting
cheapening,
what's already been happening.
But in terms of another game.
Well, 2K Marin, BioShock Infinite 2, it'll be great, the multiplayer will be fun.
Oh, God.
What? BioShock 2 was not a bad game.
No,
not at all.
I think that game has been so unfairly maligned.
Yeah.
I felt that, as I've said before, when you had something as profound as what BioShock was, to revisit it, you're just always be living in a shadow.
Yeah, BioShock 2 felt like Enter the Matrix, where it's like you're kind of occasionally interacting with the main thing you care about, but not in a way that's meaningful, in a way that kind of cheapens the original.
I mean, I felt it was like that scene in Annie Hall towards the end where he brings the other woman home and they have the lobsters and she's like, what? It's just the first moment was just so special and wonderful. You need to just let it live on out there in memory. But assuming Irrational was is with us going forward, I mean, I just don't. I guess it reminds me of like Ralph Ellison.
Assuming it's with us, you think this is going to be it for them? Like, nope.
I mean, I think of like Ralph Ellison writing Invisible Man and going like, I'm out of ideas. I mean, there's just something that feels so cathartic from a creative end. I just don't see what you do.
I think that it would be really interesting to see them tell another one of these stories. With this information out there, I think the challenge then becomes like, once you know how all of it works, can you successfully tell another story in that setting that is another kind of flip on this concept, or do you have to leave it all behind and actually do something new? I mean, we're at the turn of a generation. It's not like Irrational is going to be shipping anything anytime soon, so they've got plenty of time to figure that out. And I suspect this will be both, be definitely a critical success, and I expect it'll probably do well enough commercially.
It's on its way to be a commercial success.
For them to make another game without corporate dogs getting in the way.
Yuling.
Yeah. So I don't know. Really interested to see what they do next.
I mean, Kevin, there's a small part of me that going back to more traditional games that I've been playing is a little bit challenging.
Having just Army come off 2, Devil's Cartel.
That's the next game I played.
Yeah, that would be too. It's just as powerful in its own way. The story of Salem and Rios and what happens to them in their PMC. You're like, I never saw this coming.
With that in mind, I mean, do you think that we're going to start to see sort of the BioShock effect on? I mean, this could have a healthy thing that you just can't keep bringing the same chaff to the table when you can really show what a game can do.
I think certain games have to exist outside of that almost. I mean, Half-Life 2 is one of the greatest shooters ever made, but how many shooters actually try to emulate Half-Life 2? It's not a lot.
And I think that's because it's so difficult and it takes so long to get that stuff right. I mean, so many studios are working on these compressed timelines with existing tech that they can't necessarily make these kind of investments in. I think it's a testament to 2K that they're willing to let
I agree.
Irrational go out there and do this. I mean, it's something that they definitely do with Grand Theft Auto as well. So it's kind of their MO for these big games. But does that work as well as an annual Call of Duty? No. Right?
No. So I think what we can say is we are blessed for the crazy people that make games like BioShock Infinite. Guys, thank you so much for your time for our sort of marathon chat about BioShock Infinite. Kevin Van Ord, senior editor over at GameSpot.com. Jeff Gerstman over at GiantBomb.com. Obviously, both of their reviews can be read at their sites. If you stayed with us all this time and you haven't read them, by all means, go. These are great guys who have a very, very nice sense of what makes a game tick.
I wrote it just for you.
Exactly. Thank you for watching this episode of Spoiled Games. We will be back with a new episode in 2 weeks. We're going to go ahead and just let that pendulum swing about as far in the other direction with an in-depth discussion of probably the second most universally opinion game, Aliens, Colonial Marines. Thanks for watching.